Blood spattered across the wooden floor as Rebecca Thompson fell to her knees, her left eye already swelling shut from her husband's latest assault. The Montana Territory summer of 1876 had brought nothing but misery, and as Thomas Thompson's boot connected with her ribs, she knew this time was different. This time she might not survive. "Worthless whore," Thomas slurred, whiskey fumes enveloping her as he leaned down. "Can't even give me a son after 5 years." He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back until her neck strained. "Maybe I ought to just end it all now." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat as she saw the revolver in his hand. In 5 years of marriage, he had never drawn his gun on her. Bruises, yes, broken bones occasionally, but this was the line she had always feared he would cross. "Please, Thomas," she whispered, her voice barely audible through her swollen lips. "I'm trying, I swear I'm trying." The gun wavered as he swayed on his feet, drunk beyond reason. "Not good enough." He pressed the cold barrel against her temple. "Never good enough." A knock at the door startled them both. Thomas cursed, shoving Rebecca away as he staggered toward the front of their small homestead cabin. "Thompson," a voice called from outside. "Got a telegram from your brother in Chicago." Rebecca scrambled to her feet, the momentary distraction a gift she couldn't waste. Her gaze fell on the back door, her escape. With trembling fingers, she grabbed the small pouch of coins she'd hidden beneath a loose floorboard and her mother's locket from the dresser drawer. Thomas's voice boomed from the front room as he argued with the messenger. It was now or never. The cool evening air hit Rebecca's battered face as she slipped out the back door and ran toward the cover of trees behind their property. Pain shot through her side with each step, but fear propelled her forward. She didn't look back, not even when she heard Thomas's enraged roar echo across the valley. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs threatened to give out, the dense forest swallowing her as night fell across the Montana wilderness. Only when she could no longer see the lights of the small mining town did she collapse against a tree trunk, her entire body trembling with exhaustion and fear. "I'm free," she whispered to the stars twinkling through the pine branches overhead. But as the night chill settled around her shoulders and the sounds of nocturnal predators filled the darkness, Rebecca Thompson realized that freedom might very well cost her her life. The dawn came with no mercy, illuminating Rebecca's injuries in the harsh morning light. Her eye had swollen completely shut, her lip was split, and breathing sent stabbing pains through her side where Thomas's boot had found its mark. She had spent the night drifting in and out of consciousness, jumping at every sound, certain that her husband would track her down. She needed to move, to put more distance between herself and the man who had promised to love her but had only brought pain. With shaking legs, she forced herself to stand, using the tree for support. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, and Rebecca had no idea which way to go. Their homestead was isolated, far from the nearest neighbor, and she had rarely been allowed to leave the property. Following a small game trail, Rebecca stumbled through the wilderness. Her fine house dress, now torn and bloodied, caught on brambles. Her thin shoes offered little protection against the rocky ground. By midday, hunger gnawed at her stomach and thirst scratched at her throat. When she finally stumbled upon a small creek, Rebecca fell to her knees in gratitude. The cool water soothed her parched throat and cleaned the dried blood from her face. Her reflection in the calm pool made her gasp as a stranger stared back at her, face mottled with purple bruises, hair matted with blood. "You need to be stronger," she told her reflection. "You need to survive." As the sun began to set on her second day of freedom, Rebecca's hope began to wane. The temperature dropped rapidly, and she had no shelter, no food, and no idea where she was heading. The distant howl of wolves sent shivers down her spine. She gathered what dry branches she could find and huddled beneath a rocky outcropping, attempting to start a fire with 2 stones. Her frozen fingers struggled with the task, and tears of frustration blurred her vision. Just as she was about to give up, a spark caught the small nest of dry grass she had collected. Rebecca nurtured the tiny flame, adding small twigs until a modest fire pushed back the darkness. The crackling flames provided little comfort as her stomach cramped with hunger. She dozed fitfully, waking at every sound, the fire dying to embers by the time dawn broke. The third day brought fever. Rebecca's body, weakened by injury and exposure, began to burn from within. She staggered along the creek, following it downstream in hopes of finding civilization. Her vision swam, and each step became a monumental effort. When she finally spotted a thin column of smoke rising above the trees in the distance, she thought it might be a hallucination. Using the last of her strength, Rebecca pushed forward toward the promise of human presence. The trees thinned, revealing a small cabin nestled against the mountainside. A corral held 2 horses, and smoke curled from a stone chimney. "Help," she tried to call, but her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. The cabin door seemed miles away as she stumbled across the clearing. Her legs finally gave out just yards from the porch, and Rebecca collapsed onto the hard, packed earth. Through the haze of fever, she was vaguely aware of boot steps approaching, of strong arms lifting her, of a deep voice murmuring words she couldn't understand. Then darkness claimed her. Rebecca floated in and out of consciousness, fragments of reality breaking through the fever dreams. A cool cloth on her forehead, the taste of broth on her lips, a man's voice, low and steady, speaking to her. "You're safe now, madam. Nobody's going to hurt you here." When she finally opened her eyes, or rather, her one good eye, as the other remained swollen shut, she found herself lying on a narrow bed in a small, neat cabin. Sunlight streamed through a window, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden beams. A quilt covered her, and someone had dressed her in a clean, oversized shirt. Panic seized her as she tried to sit up. Where was she? Who had undressed her? "Whoa there," came a voice from across the room. "Best not move too quick." Rebecca's gaze darted to the source of the voice. A man stood by the hearth, stirring something in a pot over the fire. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of wheat that fell to his shoulders. When he turned to face her, Rebecca flinched instinctively, raising an arm to shield herself. The man froze, understanding dawning in his eyes as blue as the Montana sky. He set down the wooden spoon and raised both hands, palms out. "I'm not going to harm you," he said softly. "My name's Kieran Walsh. You collapsed outside my cabin 3 days ago. 3 days." Rebecca's voice cracked from disuse. Kieran nodded, keeping his distance. "You've been burning with fever. I was starting to worry you might not pull through." Rebecca's hand went to her face, feeling the swelling that had begun to subside. "Did you? My clothes." A flush crept up Kieran's neck. "I hope you'll forgive the impropriety, madam. Your dress was soaked through and muddy. I closed my eyes best I could and put one of my shirts on you. There's a widow lady, Mrs. Winters, who lives about 5 miles from here. I rode out yesterday and asked her to come help, but she's caring for her sick grandson and couldn't make the journey." Rebecca clutched the quilt tighter. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Walsh. Just Kieran is fine." He turned back to the pot. "You think you could manage some stew? You need to get your strength back." The mention of food made Rebecca's stomach growl loudly, and despite everything, she felt a blush warm her cheeks. Kieran pretended not to notice as he ladled stew into a wooden bowl and approached the bed slowly, like one might approach a wounded animal. "Can you sit up?" he asked, keeping a respectful distance. Rebecca nodded, wincing as she pushed herself upright. Kieran placed the bowl on a small table beside the bed and stepped back. "I'll give you some privacy while you eat," he said, moving toward the door. "I need to check on the horses anyway." When he had gone, Rebecca tentatively tasted the stew. It was simple venison, potatoes, and carrots, but it was the most delicious thing she had ever eaten. She devoured it, scraping the bowl clean, then leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion washing over her once more. Outside, she could hear Kieran moving around, talking softly to his horses. His deep voice was soothing, nothing like Thomas's harsh tones that always seemed to carry an undercurrent of anger even when he wasn't drunk. Rebecca's eyes grew heavy. Despite her vulnerable position in a strange man's cabin, she felt safer than she had in years. As sleep claimed her again, she wondered what would happen when she was well enough to leave and where she would go. The next time Rebecca awoke, moonlight silvered the cabin. She felt stronger, the fever having broken during her sleep. Carefully, she swung her legs over the side of the bed, testing her balance before attempting to stand. Her ribs protested, but the sharp pain had dulled to a persistent ache. The cabin was simple but tidy. A table and 2 chairs sat near the hearth, where embers still glowed. Shelves lined one wall, holding books, tins, and cooking implements. A trunk sat at the foot of the bed. She'd been occupying the only bed, she realized. Where has he been sleeping? She murmured to herself. As if in answer, she noticed a bedroll spread before the hearth. Guilt pinched at her. This stranger had given up his bed for her, nursed her through fever, and asked nothing in return. The cabin door opened quietly, and Kieran stepped inside, carrying an armload of firewood. He stopped short when he saw Rebecca standing there in the moonlight, his oversized shirt falling to her knees. "You're up," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Rebecca replied, suddenly conscious of her appearance. Her hand went to her tangled hair. "I'm sorry to have imposed on you like this." Kieran shook his head as he placed the logs beside the hearth. "No imposition. Couldn't very well leave you to die on my doorstep." He knelt to build up the fire, keeping his back to her to offer some semblance of privacy. "The fever's gone." "I think so." The fire caught, flames licking at the dry wood and casting the cabin in a warm glow. Kieran remained crouched by the hearth as if unsure what to do next. "I should introduce myself properly," Rebecca said. "My name is Rebecca Thompson." She hesitated, then added, "I ran away from my husband." Kieran nodded slowly. "I figured as much, given your condition when you arrived." He stood, still keeping his distance. "Are you hungry? There's more stew, please." He moved to the pot hanging at the edge of the hearth and served her another bowl of the now thickened stew. Rebecca accepted it gratefully and sat at the small table. Kieran joined her after a moment's hesitation, bringing his own bowl. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling fire and the clink of spoons against bowls. Rebecca was acutely aware of how strange this situation was, dining with a man she didn't know, wearing nothing but his shirt, having been completely at his mercy for days. Yet she felt no fear in his presence. "Where are we?" she finally asked. "About 20 miles east of Silverdale," Kieran replied. "That's the nearest town." Rebecca's heart sank. Silverdale was where Thomas often went to drink and gamble. It was too close. "He'll be looking for me," she whispered. Kieran's blue eyes met hers across the table. "Your husband?" She nodded, her appetite suddenly gone. "Well," Kieran said, setting down his spoon, "he won't find you here. Not many folks know about this place, and I don't socialize much in town." "Why do you live so far from civilization?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about this quiet man who had saved her life. A shadow crossed his face. "Wanted some peace after the war. Found I preferred the company of horses and mountains to most people." He stood and collected their bowls. "You should rest more. Tomorrow we can figure out what you want to do next." Rebecca returned to the bed, but sleep eluded her as she pondered her situation. She had no family, no friends, and only a few coins to her name. Thomas would be searching for her not out of love, but out of the same possessive rage that made him beat her when she displeased him. She had nowhere to go, no skills except those of a housewife, and no prospects for supporting herself. Across the cabin, Kieran settled onto his bedroll, his breathing eventually deepening into sleep. Rebecca watched the fire's glow reflect on the log walls and wondered if she had merely traded one form of dependence for another. Morning brought clarity and the realization that Rebecca's options were severely limited. She could try to make it to one of the larger cities, Helena or Bozeman perhaps, where she might find work as a laundress or maid. But without money for the stagecoach or supplies for the journey, such plans seemed impossible. Kieran was already outside when she awoke. Through the window, she could see him chopping wood, his movements efficient and powerful. Rebecca used the opportunity to examine herself in the small mirror hanging near the wash basin. The swelling around her eye had subsided enough that she could open it slightly, though the skin remained discolored. Her split lip had begun to heal, and the bruises on her arms had faded to a sickly yellow. She used water from the pitcher to wash her face and attempted to detangle her hair with her fingers. A comb sat on the small table, but using another person's comb felt too intimate. Instead, she braided her auburn hair as neatly as possible and straightened the oversized shirt, wishing desperately for proper clothing. When Kieran returned, he carried not only an armload of wood but also a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Morning," he said, setting down the wood. "Thought you might want these." He handed her the package. "Mrs. Peterson from the next valley over died last winter. Her husband gave me some of her things when he moved back east, thought they might be useful if I ever took a wife." A flush crept up his neck. "They're clean, been in the trunk." Rebecca opened the package to find several simple dresses, undergarments, and even a pair of boots. "Thank you," she said, emotion tightening her throat. It had been so long since anyone had shown her such kindness. "I'll wait outside while you change," Kieran said, already heading for the door. "Take your time." The dress was a bit large but serviceable. Rebecca felt human again as she buttoned it up, the soft calico, a welcome change from the shirt she'd been wearing. The boots were surprisingly close to her size, and she found clean stockings among the garments as well. When she emerged from the cabin, Kieran was sitting on the porch steps, whittling a piece of wood. He looked up at her appearance, his knife pausing mid-stroke. "Better?" he asked. Rebecca nodded. "Much, thank you again." He returned to his whittling. "You're welcome to stay until you're fully healed," he said, eyes on his work. "No rush to decide what comes next." The offer hung between them, both a lifeline and a complication. Rebecca lowered herself carefully onto the step beside him, keeping a respectable distance. "I don't want to impose further," she said. "You've already done more than most would." Kieran shrugged. "It's no trouble, gets lonely out here sometimes." He glanced at her. "But I understand if you're not comfortable staying." Rebecca considered her options once more. Thomas would be searching the nearby towns and homesteads. If she left now, she had nowhere to go and no means to support herself. But staying meant depending on a stranger's charity and risking his reputation as well as her own. "Perhaps just a few more days," she conceded. "Until I'm stronger." Kieran nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. "Can you cook?" he asked suddenly. "Yes, of course." "Good, I can hunt and chop wood, but my cooking leaves much to be desired, as you've probably noticed." For the first time in what felt like forever, Rebecca smiled. "The stew wasn't that bad. It was the only thing I know how to make," Kieran admitted with a rueful grin that transformed his solemn face. "Been eating it for 3 days straight." Something warm unfurled in Rebecca's chest at the sight of his smile, surprising her with its intensity. She looked away quickly, reminding herself that she was still a married woman, technically, and that her current situation was precarious at best. "I can cook," she said again. "It would be the least I could do to repay your kindness." The days fell into a rhythm as Rebecca regained her strength. She took over the cooking and cleaning of the small cabin, finding comfort in the familiar tasks. Kieran hunted, tended his small garden, and cared for the horses. They moved around each other cautiously at first, like dancers unfamiliar with the steps. Rebecca learned that Kieran had fought for the Union in the Civil War, had wandered west afterward, and had built the cabin himself 5 years prior. He rarely went to town, except for supplies he couldn't produce himself. He read voraciously. His small bookshelf contained everything from Shakespeare to dime novels, and sometimes read aloud in the evenings, his deep voice bringing the words to life. For his part, Kieran learned that Rebecca had grown up in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher, and had married Thomas at 18 when he'd promised to take her west for a grand adventure. The adventure had quickly soured as Thomas's true nature emerged after they settled in Montana territory. Rebecca had no family left and nowhere to return to in the east. They never discussed how long she would stay, but as the bruises faded completely and her ribs healed, the question hung unspoken between them. Rebecca found herself inventing reasons to delay her departure: bread that needed baking, clothes that needed mending, a garden that needed tending. One evening, as they sat before the fire, Kieran cleared his throat. "Winter will be here before long," he said, his eyes on the flames. "First snow usually comes by early October." Rebecca's hands stilled on the shirt she was mending one of his. "I should be gone before then," she said, though the thought filled her with dread. "Or you could stay." The words came out in a rush. Kieran still didn't look at her. "I mean, traveling in winter would be dangerous. You could wait until spring." Hope and fear warred within her. "People would talk if they knew I was living here." Nobody comes up this way, especially in winter. He finally met her gaze. It wouldn't be proper, I know that, but it would be safe. Safe, the word resonated through her. In the month she had been at Kieran's cabin, she had not flinched at sudden movements, had not lain awake fearing the sound of drunken footsteps, had not hidden her opinions or measured her words. For the first time in 5 years, she felt safe. "If I stayed," she said carefully, "I would need to contribute more. I can't just be a burden all winter." "You're not a burden, Rebecca." The way he said her name, soft and reverent, made her heart skip. "But if it makes you feel better, I could use help with the horses. And maybe you could teach me to read better. I never had much schooling." It was a thin excuse. Kieran read just fine, but Rebecca seized it gratefully. "I would like that." Something shifted between them that night, a tacit acknowledgement that what had begun as temporary rescue had become something more lasting. As Rebecca lay in the bed that was now indisputably hers, Kieran still insisted on sleeping near the hearth. She wondered what the winter would bring, and whether she was making a terrible mistake or the best decision of her life. September brought the first hints of autumn to the mountains. The aspens turned golden, their leaves quivering in the cool breezes that heralded the coming change of seasons. Kieran worked from dawn to dusk, preparing for winter hunting and smoking meat, chopping and stacking endless cords of firewood, repairing the cabin's roof and chinking between the logs. Rebecca worked alongside him, learning skills she had never needed before. She dried fruits and vegetables from the garden, rendered fat for candles, and helped gather pine nuts from the forest. Her hands grew calloused, her skin tanned from the sun, and her body stronger than it had ever been. One crisp morning, as frost sparkled on the grass, Kieran approached her with determination in his stride. "I need to go to town for supplies," he said. "Things we can't make or grow: salt, coffee, flour, ammunition." He hesitated. "Would you like to come with me?" Rebecca stiffened. Town meant people. People meant gossip. Gossip might reach Thomas. "I'll be fine here," she said quickly. Kieran nodded, not pressing the issue. "I'll be back by nightfall. There's a rifle above the door if you need it." He showed her how to load and fire it, then saddled his horse and rode away, glancing back once as he disappeared into the trees. The day stretched endlessly without him. Rebecca realized how accustomed she had grown to his presence, the sound of his axe outside, his boots on the porch, his quiet humming as he worked. The cabin felt hollow without him. As promised, Kieran returned as the sun dipped below the mountains, his packhorse laden with supplies. Rebecca rushed outside at the sound of hoofbeats, relief washing over her at the sight of him. "Everything all right?" he asked, noting her anxious expression. "Fine," she said, embarrassed by her reaction. "Just quiet without you." Something warmed in his eyes. "Missed me, did you?" It was said teasingly, but Rebecca found she couldn't joke in return. "Yes," she admitted softly. "I did." Kieran's smile faded, replaced by an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment they simply looked at each other, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then he cleared his throat and dismounted. "Got something for you," he said, reaching into one of the saddlebags. He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "It's not much, but—" Rebecca untied the string and opened the package to find a beautiful tortoiseshell comb and a small bottle of rose-scented hair oil. "Kieran," she breathed, touching the comb reverently. "It's lovely, but you shouldn't have spent money on me." "Wanted to," he said simply. "Saw it and thought of you." That night, after she had washed her hair in heated water and combed the rose oil through it, Rebecca sat before the fire while Kieran unpacked the remaining supplies. The comb was the first gift she had received in years. Thomas had stopped bothering with such niceties after their first anniversary. "Thank you," she said again, running her fingers through her scented hair. "For everything." Kieran paused in his unpacking, his gaze lingering on her. "You deserve nice things, Rebecca," he said quietly. "You deserve to be treated well." Something in his tone made her look up. His blue eyes were earnest, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I heard talk in town," he continued, setting down the bag of coffee he'd been holding. "About a man named Thompson offering a reward for information about his missing wife. Red-headed woman," he said, "ran off about 2 months back." Rebecca's blood ran cold. "What did you tell them?" Nothing. Kieran moved to sit beside her on the bench. But people know I live alone up here if they start connecting the pieces. I should leave, Rebecca said, panic rising in her throat. I'm putting you in danger. No, Kieran's hand covered hers, warm and calloused. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to be careful. He took a deep breath. There's something else you should know. Your husband, he's got a reputation. Bad one. They say he's killed men in card games, that the law's been looking for a reason to hang him. Rebecca wasn't surprised. Thomas had always had a violent streak, and it had only worsened with time. He'll kill me if he finds me, she whispered, and probably you too. He won't find you, Kieran said with such conviction that Rebecca almost believed him, but I've been thinking. There might be a way to make sure he stops looking. How? Kieran's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, sending shivers up her arm. If he thought you were dead. But I'm not. No, but rumors spread fast in these parts. If word got back to him that a woman matching your description had been found dead in the mountains, attacked by a bear maybe. Rebecca considered the idea. It was deceitful, but if it meant freedom from the constant fear of Thomas finding her, perhaps it was worth it. How would we start such a rumor? Leave that to me, Kieran said. I know a few people in town who owe me favors, people who'll be discreet. He hesitated. But Rebecca, if we do this, it means you'd have to stay hidden here at least until we're sure he's gone. Could be months, maybe longer. The implication hung between them, months together in this small cabin, months of this strange domestic arrangement that was neither proper nor definable. I'd stay, she said softly, if you'll have me. Kieran's hand tightened on hers. I'll have you, he replied, his voice rough. Then, seeming to realize the potential double meaning of his words, he added quickly, as a guest, I mean, for as long as you need. But the look in his eyes told Rebecca that his feelings, like hers, had grown beyond those of rescuer and rescued. They were treading dangerous ground now, both legally and morally. Yet as she gazed into Kieran's earnest face, Rebecca couldn't bring herself to care. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the mountain in pristine white in late September. Rebecca woke to a transformed world, the familiar landscape rendered magical by the snow. Kieran had risen before her, as always, and she found him on the porch, watching the snowflakes drift down. It's beautiful, she said, joining him with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. He nodded, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. First snow always is, he glanced at her. Cold though, you should go back inside. In a minute. Rebecca turned her face up to the sky, letting snowflakes melt on her cheeks. I've always loved the snow. Thomas hated it, said it made everything harder. He wasn't wrong about that, Kieran admitted. But there's beauty in the difficulty too, makes you appreciate the warmth more. As if to emphasize his point, he placed an arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer to share his warmth. Rebecca stiffened for a moment, then relaxed against him, allowing herself this small comfort. They stood that way for several minutes, watching the snow transform their little corner of Montana. When Rebecca finally shivered, Kieran guided her back inside, where the fire blazed merrily in the hearth. I set a rumor in motion, he said as they warmed their hands by the fire. About a woman's body found up near Granite Pass. Red hair, blue dress, looked like a bear attack. Rebecca's stomach tightened. Do you think he'll believe it? The man I told is reliable. He'll make it sound convincing. Kieran hesitated. I asked around about Thompson while I was in town. Word is he's been drinking heavily, asking questions about you in every settlement for 50 miles. Fear gripped Rebecca's heart. He won't give up easily. No, Kieran agreed. But a dead wife, that's something even he would have to accept eventually. That evening, as the snow continued to fall, Kieran dragged the small table away from the wall and produced a worn chess set from his trunk. My father taught me to play, he explained as he set up the pieces. Thought maybe you'd like to learn, helps pass the long winter evenings. Rebecca smiled at his thoughtfulness. I'd love to. The chess lessons became a nightly ritual as October deepened, and the snow piled higher around the cabin. Kieran was a patient teacher, explaining strategies and allowing Rebecca to take back moves when she made obvious mistakes. Their fingers would occasionally brush as they moved pieces across the board, each touch sending a jolt of awareness through Rebecca. One night, As a blizzard raged outside, Kieran captured Rebecca's queen with an unexpected move. "You're not paying attention," he chided gently. "What's on your mind?" Rebecca hesitated. What was on her mind was him, the way his hair caught the firelight, the depth of his blue eyes, the strength in his hands as he moved the chess pieces. But she couldn't say that. "I was wondering about your life before," she said instead. "You mentioned the war, but not much else." Kieran leaned back in his chair, his expression growing distant. "Not much to tell. Grew up in Pennsylvania. Father was a blacksmith, joined the Union Army at 17, fought for 3 years. His jaw tightened. Saw things no man should see." "Is that why you came west? To forget?" "Partly." He absently rubbed a scar on his left hand, "partly to find something worth remembering instead." His gaze met hers across the chessboard. "Think I might have found it." The implication in his words made Rebecca's heart race. She looked down at the board, moving a pawn aimlessly. "Your move," she murmured. Kieran reached across the table, his fingers gently tilting her chin up until she met his eyes again. "Rebecca," he said softly, "I know your situation. I know you're still legally married. I'm not asking for anything you can't give, but I need you to know that he broke off, struggling for words. "That having you here has been the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." Rebecca covered his hand with hers. "For me too," she whispered. For a moment, they remained frozen in that tableau, the confession hanging between them. Then, slowly, Kieran withdrew his hand and returned his attention to the chessboard. But something had shifted, an acknowledgement of feelings that could no longer be ignored. As winter settled fully upon the mountain, Rebecca and Kieran fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were for chores, tending the horses, clearing paths through the snow, maintaining the cabin. Afternoons were often spent indoors, Rebecca teaching Kieran to write better while he taught her to whittle and repair tack. Evenings were for chess, reading aloud, and increasingly honest conversations. One stormy December night, as wind howled around the cabin's eaves, Kieran revealed why he had chosen such an isolated life. "After the war," he said, his voice low as they sat before the fire, "I couldn't abide crowds. The noise, the press of bodies brought back memories of the battlefield. Tried working in a sawmill in Oregon, but the sounds of the saws." He shook his head. "Found I could only breathe easy in open spaces with more trees than people." "And you've been alone all this time?" Rebecca asked. "Until you," he smiled, the firelight softening his features. "Never minded the solitude before. Now I can't imagine going back to it." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Rebecca found herself moving closer to him on the bench they shared, drawn by something she couldn't name. "Tell me about your dreams," Kieran said suddenly. "Before everything with Thompson, what did you want from life?" Rebecca considered the question. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to dream of anything beyond survival. "I wanted children," she admitted. "A home filled with laughter. I wanted to plant a garden that would bloom year after year, to put down roots somewhere. And now, Rebecca looked around the small cabin that had become her sanctuary. "Now I want peace, safety," she met his gaze. "Happiness. You deserve all of that," Kieran said softly, "and more." Outside, the storm intensified, snow pelting against the windows and wind finding every tiny gap in the cabin's walls. The temperature dropped rapidly, and despite the roaring fire, Rebecca shivered. "Cold?" Kieran asked, concerned. "A little." Without hesitation, he put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. Rebecca tensed briefly, then relaxed into his warmth. They had never been this close before, not for this long, not with this intent. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong, through the fabric of his shirt. "Better," he murmured, his breath stirring her hair. "Yes," she whispered. They sat that way for a long time, watching the fire and listening to the storm. Rebecca's eyes grew heavy, the combination of warmth and comfort lulling her towards sleep. Without thinking, she rested her head on Kieran's shoulder. "Rebecca," he said, her name a reverence on his lips. She lifted her head to look at him, and found his face mere inches from hers, his eyes dark with an emotion she recognized because it mirrored her own. Kieran raised a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle as he traced the contours of her face. "I've wanted to do this since the day you opened your eyes in my cabin," he whispered. Then he was kissing her, softly at first, giving her every chance to pull away. But Rebecca didn't want to pull away. She leaned into the kiss, her hands finding their way to his shoulders as his arms encircled her waist. The kiss deepened, months of unspoken longing pouring into it. Rebecca felt lightheaded, overwhelmed by sensation and emotion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, she pressed her forehead against his. "I'm still married," she reminded him, the words painful to speak. "I know," Kieran replied, his hands still at her waist. "And I'll respect that." "But Rebecca, that man gave up any right to call you wife the first time he raised his hand to you. The law wouldn't see it that way." "Then the law is wrong." Kieran's voice was fierce. "You deserve to be loved, not hurt, cherished, not broken." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes at his words, at the truth she heard in them. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Not of you, of hoping for too much." Kieran brushed away a tear with his thumb. "We'll take it one day at a time," he promised. "No expectations, no demands, just us figuring it out together." Rebecca nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. Kieran pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, then stood, pulling her to her feet. "It's late," he said. "You should get some rest." As Rebecca lay in bed that night, listening to the storm and watching Kieran's silhouette as he banked the fire, she realized something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a woman seeking refuge. She was a woman falling in love with a man who seemed to be falling right alongside her. Christmas arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. Rebecca woke to find Kieran already outside, tending to the horses. She dressed quickly, excited to share the small gifts she had prepared for him, a new scarf she had knitted from yarn unraveled from one of her old petticoats, and a batch of molasses cookies made with precious supplies he had brought from town. When Kieran returned, stamping snow from his boots, his cheeks ruddy from cold, he carried a small fir tree over his shoulder. "Thought we might celebrate properly," he said, setting the tree in a bucket near the hearth. "Used to do this with my family before the war." Together, they decorated the little tree with carved wooden ornaments Kieran had whittled in secret, strings of dried berries Rebecca had saved, and small candles carefully affixed to the branches. It was simple but beautiful, a symbol of the life they were cautiously building together. That evening, after exchanging their modest gifts, they sat on the bench before the fire, Rebecca nestled against Kieran's side as they admired their handiwork. "I have one more gift for you," Kieran said, reaching behind the bench to retrieve something wrapped in oilcloth. "Been working on it for a while." Rebecca unwrapped the package to find a small wooden chest, intricately carved with wildflowers and vines. The craftsmanship was exquisite, each petal and leaf lovingly detailed. "Oh, Kieran," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful." "Open it," he urged. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a silver ring set with a small blue stone. Rebecca's heart stuttered in her chest. "It was my mother's," Kieran explained quickly. Not a proposal, not yet, but a promise." He took her hand in his. "When the time is right, when you're free, I'll ask properly. Until then, I wanted you to have something to remind you that you're cherished." Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she lifted the ring from its nest. It was simple but elegant, the blue stone catching the firelight. "I can't wear it," she said sadly. "Not until I know." Kieran produced a fine silver chain from his pocket. "Thought of that. You can wear it around your neck, close to your heart, until the day comes when you can wear it properly." He threaded the ring onto the chain and fastened it around her neck. The ring rested just below her collarbone, warm against her skin. Rebecca touched it reverently, then threw her arms around Kieran's neck, overcome with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder. "For everything. For saving me, for sheltering me, for," she pulled back to look into his eyes. "For loving me." "Always," he promised, and sealed it with a kiss. Winter deepened, January bringing the coldest temperatures Rebecca had ever experienced. The world outside their cabin seemed frozen in time, preserved in ice and snow. Inside, however, their relationship continued to bloom, cautious but steady. They maintained certain boundaries. Kieran still slept by the hearth, while Rebecca took the bed, but their days were filled with shared work, laughter, and increasingly tender moments. In February, A rare clear day prompted Kieran to suggest a ride to check his trap lines and get fresh air. They bundled up against the cold, Rebecca riding behind Kieran on his sturdy gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist. The forest was magical in its winter coat, sunlight sparkling on untouched snow and icicles hanging from tree branches like crystal chandeliers. At the crest of a hill, Kieran reined in the horse, allowing them to admire the vista of mountains stretching to the horizon. Rebecca rested her cheek against his back, content in a way she had never imagined possible a year ago. "Beautiful," she murmured. "Rebecca," Kieran said suddenly, his voice serious. "When spring comes, what do you want to do?" The question caught her off guard. They had spoken of the future only in vague terms, both aware of the complications her marital status presented. "What do you mean?" Kieran turned in the saddle to face her as best he could. "I mean, do you want to stay with me? Or would you rather go to one of the bigger settlements, make a fresh start there?" The thought of leaving him made Rebecca's chest ache. "I want to stay," she said without hesitation. "If that's what you want to." Relief washed over his features. "It is." He took her gloved hand in his. "I've been thinking about building another cabin, a proper one, down by the creek where the land is flatter. More room, better for a garden, maybe even." He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks despite the cold. "Maybe even what?" Rebecca prompted. "Maybe even room for a family someday," he finished quietly, "if that's something you might want." The image his words conjured a larger cabin filled with children's laughter, a thriving garden. Kieran by her side was so vivid Rebecca could almost touch it. It was everything she had once dreamed of, before Thomas had crushed those dreams beneath his boot heel. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." Kieran's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned forward to kiss her, their lips cold at first touch but quickly warming. When they returned to the cabin, cheeks flushed from cold and eyes bright with shared dreams, Rebecca felt a sense of hope she hadn't experienced in years. That night, as they ate dinner and played chess by the fire, she found herself studying Kieran's face, memorizing every line and plane, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the small scar that bisected his left eyebrow. "What?" he asked, catching her staring. "Just thinking about how lucky I am," she replied honestly. "That of all the places I could have collapsed, it was at your door." Kieran reached across the table to take her hand. "I'm the lucky one," he said, "and as soon as the snow melts, I'll start on that cabin, I promise." True to his word, as March brought the first signs of thaw, Kieran began preparing to build. He chose a site near the creek, where the land was fertile and relatively flat, with good drainage and protection from the worst of the mountain winds. Together, they marked out the dimensions larger than his current cabin, with a proper bedroom, a larger kitchen area, and a covered porch that would catch the morning sun. Rebecca threw herself into planning the garden she would plant once the danger of frost had passed. She sketched layouts by firelight, deciding where each vegetable would grow, where she would plant herbs and flowers, already imagining the riot of colors and scents that would surround their new home. Their new home. The phrase echoed in her mind, filling her with both joy and trepidation. Would they ever truly be free to call it that? The shadow of Thomas Thompson still loomed over her future, a legal barrier to the happiness she and Kieran were building. April brought warmer days and the first wildflowers pushing through the remaining patches of snow. Kieran began felling trees for the new cabin, the sound of his axe a constant rhythm that accompanied Rebecca's spring cleaning and garden preparations. One afternoon, as she hung laundry on a line strung between two pines, Rebecca spotted a rider approaching from the forest trail. Fear instantly froze her blood. They had no visitors, ever. She dropped the wet shirt she was holding and ran toward where Kieran was working, her heart pounding. "Someone's coming," she gasped when she reached him. Kieran immediately set down his axe, his expression hardening. "Get inside," he said. "Stay there until I call for you." Rebecca hesitated, unwilling to leave him alone to face whatever was coming. Kieran touched her cheek gently. "It's all right," he assured her. "Probably just a lost traveler, but just in case." She nodded and hurried back to the cabin, watching through the window as Kieran stood his ground, waiting for the approaching rider. When the horse finally broke through the tree line, Rebecca's breath caught, but it wasn't Thomas. Instead, she recognized the aging shopkeeper from Silverdale, Mr. Harmon, who had occasionally supplied Kieran with goods. After observing their conversation for a few minutes and seeing Kieran's relaxed posture, Rebecca cautiously stepped outside. Kieran waved her over. "Rebecca, this is Mr. Harmon from town. He's brought news." The old man tipped his hat to her. "Madam," he greeted, "didn't believe the rumors myself, but seems they were true. Kieran's got himself a lady friend up here." Rebecca blushed, moving to stand beside Kieran. "It's not what it seems, Mr. Harmon," she began, but the shopkeeper waved away her concern. "None of my business, madam. Live and let live, that's my motto." He turned back to Kieran. "Thought you'd want to know that fella Thompson finally left these parts. Heard he went back east after they found that woman's body up near Granite Pass." He scratched his beard. "Course, now they're saying it might not have been his wife after all, just some unfortunate soul who matched the description, but Thompson's gone either way." Relief washed over Rebecca in a dizzying wave. Thomas was gone. The ruse had worked. She felt Kieran's hand on the small of her back, steadying her. "You're sure?" Kieran asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Sold his claim to the Petersons about a month back," Harmon confirmed. "Said there were too many ghosts in Montana for him." The old man's shrewd eyes flickered to Rebecca, then back to Kieran. "Thought you might sleep easier knowing that." "I appreciate the news," Kieran said. "Would you stay for some coffee? It's a long ride back to town." Harmon accepted the invitation, and Rebecca busied herself preparing coffee and some of the biscuits she had baked that morning. As the men talked on the porch, she moved around the cabin in a daze, hardly daring to believe that Thomas was truly gone from her life. After the shopkeeper departed, Kieran found Rebecca sitting on the edge of the bed, the silver ring clutched in her palm. He knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "He's gone," she whispered. "Really gone?" Kieran nodded. "Seems that way." "But I'm still legally his wife," Rebecca said, the realization dampening her relief. "Even if he thinks I'm dead, in the eyes of the law and God, I'm still married to him." Kieran was quiet for a moment, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. "There might be a way," he said finally. "In some territories, if a spouse abandons the marriage for a certain period, it can be grounds for divorce. And if he's gone east thinking you're dead, he's certainly abandoned the marriage." Hope flickered in Rebecca's chest. "How long? I'm not sure. We'd need to ask someone who knows the law better than I do." He squeezed her hands. "But Rebecca, even if it takes years, I'll wait. What we're building, it's worth waiting for." Tears filled her eyes at his steadfast devotion. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "You deserve everything good in this world," Kieran countered fiercely. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it." He rose to his feet, pulling her up with him, and wrapped her in an embrace so tender it made her heart ache. Rebecca clung to him, allowing herself to believe, truly believe, that happiness might be within her grasp after all. The new cabin took shape as spring blossomed into summer. Kieran worked from dawn to dusk, his determination to provide Rebecca with a proper home driving him through exhaustion. Rebecca planted her garden, the seedlings thriving under her care, and helped with the building whenever she could, holding boards steady, mixing mud for chinking, even learning to shingle the roof under Kieran's patient instruction. By July, the cabin's walls stood complete, the roof was shingled, and the stone chimney rose proudly against the blue Montana sky. It was larger than Kieran's original home, with 2 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and hearth, and a separate bedroom with a window that caught the morning light. Kieran had even built a proper bed frame, and Rebecca had stuffed a new mattress with fresh straw and dried herbs. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the new cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Kieran took Rebecca's hand. "There's something else I want to build," he said, "before the summer's end." "What's that?" He gestured to the space beside the cabin. "A bathhouse. Small one with a proper tub. Thought you might like that, hot baths whenever you want, not just when we heat water on the stove." Rebecca's eyes widened at the luxury he was describing. "That would be wonderful," she admitted. "But it's so much work, Kieran. You've already done so much." "I want to," he insisted. "I want to give you everything I can." She leaned her head against his shoulder, overwhelmed by his generosity. "You've already given me more than I ever dreamed possible," she said softly. "A home, safety, a future." Kieran turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Speaking of the future," he began, "I rode to Bozeman last week while you were visiting Mrs. Winters." Rebecca sat up straighter. "Bozeman, that's 2 days' ride. Why didn't you tell me? Wanted it to be a surprise." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded document. "I spoke to a lawyer there about your situation." Rebecca's heart began to race as she took the paper from him with trembling fingers. It was filled with legal terminology she didn't fully understand, but certain phrases jumped out at her. Petition for divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty and declaration of presumed death. "The lawyer says there are 2 paths," Kieran explained. "Since Thompson thinks you're dead and has left the territory, you could file for divorce on grounds of abandonment. Or, since he's telling people his wife is dead, we could have him legally declare you deceased, which would effectively end the marriage." "And then what?" Rebecca asked, hardly daring to hope. Kieran took a deep breath. "And then, if you wanted, we could be married, properly, legally, in the eyes of God and everyone else." The directness of his statement took Rebecca's breath away. Although they had spoken of a future together, neither had explicitly mentioned marriage since the Christmas when he had given her the ring she still wore on a chain around her neck. "Is that what you want?" she asked softly. In answer, Kieran slid from the porch bench onto one knee before her, taking her hands in his. "Rebecca Thompson, I have loved you since the day you opened your eyes in my cabin and looked at me like I might hurt you. I've loved you every day since, watching you heal and grow strong again. I want to spend the rest of my days building a life with you, a good life, filled with joy and peace and children if we're blessed with them." His blue eyes shone with emotion in the twilight. "Will you marry me when you're free to do so?" Tears spilled down Rebecca's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Kieran Walsh, I will marry you." He surged up to kiss her, his arms encircling her waist as hers wound around his neck. The kiss was a promise sealed in the golden light of sunset with the mountains as their witnesses. When they finally broke apart, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "The lawyer says the process could take 6 months, maybe longer. Are you willing to wait?" Rebecca smiled through her tears. "I'd wait forever for you," she said, "but 6 months seems manageable." That night, as they walked back to Kieran's original cabin, still their home, until the new one was completely finished, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in years. The shadow of Thomas Thompson was fading at last, receding like the final snowmelt before the warmth of spring. The summer passed in a blur of work and joy. The new cabin was completed by August, its windows framed with curtains Rebecca had sewn from fabric Kieran brought from Bozeman. The bathhouse he had promised took shape beside it, a small structure with a large copper tub that Kieran had traded 3 months' worth of furs to obtain. In September, they moved into their new home, christening it with a small celebration attended by their few neighbors, Mrs. Winters and her grandson, Mr. Harmon from the general store, and a young couple who had recently settled in the next valley. None questioned Rebecca's presence or status, accepting Kieran's vague explanation that she was staying with him until they could be properly wed. As autumn painted the mountains in fiery hues, Rebecca's garden yielded a bountiful harvest. She preserved fruits and vegetables for the coming winter, teaching Kieran the canning techniques her mother had passed down to her. Together they smoked meat, gathered nuts and berries, and prepared for the cold months ahead. One crisp October morning, as frost silvered the grass and their breath formed clouds in the chill air, a rider appeared on the trail leading to their cabin. Rebecca, who had been collecting the last of the tomatoes before the impending frost could claim them, straightened with alarm. Despite Mr. Harmon's assurances, the sight of an unexpected visitor still triggered her fear that Thomas might have returned. Kieran emerged from the woodshed, axe in hand, his stance alert but not threatening as the rider approached. As the horse drew closer, Rebecca could see it was a young man she didn't recognize, dressed in the practical clothes of a courier or lawman, Mr. Walsh. The rider called as he reined in his horse before the cabin. "That's me," Kieran confirmed, setting aside his axe. The young man dismounted, producing an envelope from his saddlebag. Got some papers for you from Judge Wilson's office in Bozeman. He handed the envelope to Kieran. Need you to sign for them. Rebecca's heart began to pound as she moved to Kieran's side. Could it be news about the divorce petition? They had filed the papers in July, but had been warned it could take much longer for any response. After signing the courier's ledger and offering the young man water for himself and his horse, Kieran opened the envelope, his expression guarded as he scanned the contents. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face. "It's good news," he said, handing the papers to Rebecca. "Thompson officially declared you deceased in Chicago last month, submitted a death certificate and everything. The judge says since he's legally declared you dead and has since remarried, your marriage is effectively dissolved." Rebecca's knees weakened at the news. "Remarried," she whispered. "Already, apparently." Kieran's jaw tightened. "The judge says he married a widow in Chicago just 2 weeks after filing your death certificate." A complex mixture of emotions washed over Rebecca: relief that she was legally free, anger that Thomas had moved on so quickly, though she had done the same, and overwhelming joy that there was now nothing standing between her and a future with Kieran. "I'm free," she said, the words strange on her tongue after so many years of feeling trapped. "Truly free." Kieran gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that drove the breath from her lungs. "Free to marry me," he whispered against her hair, "if you still want to." Rebecca pulled back to look into his face, cupping his cheeks in her hands. "I want nothing more in this world," she assured him. They were married 2 weeks later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Silverdale. The ceremony was simple, held in their new cabin with only Mrs. Winters and Mr. Harmon as witnesses. Rebecca wore a dress of deep blue calico that Kieran had brought from Bozeman, with wildflowers in her hair. Kieran wore the only suit he owned, purchased years ago for a funeral and kept carefully wrapped in his trunk. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Kieran slid his mother's ring onto Rebecca's finger where it belonged at last, she felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. Their kiss sealed promises made long ago in the quiet of winter nights and summer evenings, promises now blessed before God and their makeshift family. That night, as husband and wife in their new home, Rebecca and Kieran loved each other with all the tenderness and passion they had held in check for so long. Afterward, as they lay entwined beneath quilts Rebecca had stitched, the first snow of the season began to fall outside their window. "Look," Kieran murmured, nodding toward the glass where snowflakes drifted past. "Perfect timing. Now we're truly snowed in together." Rebecca laughed softly, nestling closer to him. "I can't think of anything better than being snowed in with you." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I promised you a fire that never goes out," he reminded her, gesturing to the hearth where flames danced merrily. "And I intend to keep that promise in more ways than one." As winter settled once more upon the Montana mountains, Rebecca Walsh found herself living the life she had once only dreamed of. The bruises inflicted by Thompson had long since faded, leaving no visible scars. The emotional wounds had healed too, under Kieran's patient care and unwavering love. Their cabin became a true home, filled with the small treasures they created together: furniture Kieran crafted, quilts Rebecca stitched, shelves lined with books they read aloud to each other on long winter nights. The fire in the hearth burned constantly, tended with care to ensure it never went out, a symbol of the warmth and love that sustained them through the cold months. By spring, Rebecca's waistline had begun to thicken, her body nurturing the child conceived in those first joyful weeks of marriage. Kieran's reaction to the news had been everything she could have hoped for: astonishment giving way to wonder. Then joy so profound, it had brought tears to his eyes as he knelt to press his lips to her still flat stomach. "Thank you," he had whispered, looking up at her with such reverence that Rebecca's own eyes had filled with tears. "For trusting me with your heart, your life, and now our child." As Rebecca's garden bloomed once more and her belly grew round with new life, she often found herself standing on their porch, watching Kieran work and marveling at the journey that had brought her here. From the darkest days of her life had come the greatest joy, a truth she held close to her heart each night as she fell asleep in her husband's arms. safe, loved, and finally, irrevocably free. In August of 1878, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Kieran's mother. 2 years later came James, named for Rebecca's father. Their family grew alongside their homestead, more land cleared for crops, a proper barn built for the horses, and the milk cow Kieran purchased to celebrate James's birth, fruit trees planted that would one day shade their children's children. Sometimes, on summer evenings as they sat on their porch watching their children play, Rebecca would touch the fading scar above her eyebrow, the last visible reminder of Thomas Thompson, and marvel at how far she had come. From a woman with bruises and no home to a wife, mother, and partner, in creating a life more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. And each night, before they retired to bed, Kieran would add another log to the hearth, keeping his promise of a fire that never went out, a promise of warmth, of protection, of a love that had saved them both.